Greetings, YouTube. I was watching Gopher play Witcher 3 the other day, which I think is a very silly name. Witch makes sense, witchery makes sense, Witcher, not so much. And yes, I'm aware that it was originally done in Polish. But in the space of an hour episode, he must have had 6 or 7 encounters. And not just minor encounters. There were mobs. Like in some cases, 6 or 7 opponents. And each one of those opponents would easily have been the match for your average commoner. And he went up against these two insectoid creatures, etrigens or something. I'm not positive what they're called. Etrigens or echidnias or echinacea, I'm not positive. But any one of those by itself could probably have taken out an entire village all by its onesies. And they are a hive entity, so there are workers, warriors, and then there's the queens at the top. So they're very dangerous. They're never alone. And just one of them could have wiped out an entire village. And even Geralt, who is fairly high level at this point in the game, I think Gopher's character is, I want to say in the 20s, maybe 30, I'm not positive, 30th level, but it still has a hard time with these things. You got to make sure you're moving, got to make sure you're being very dynamic. He's using lots of magic to keep himself both defended and being offensive. And it suddenly occurred to me, how do ordinary people live in this world? Because this isn't just like random bandit problem. This is random bandits and cannibals and pirates and drowners and insect monsters and harpies and sirens and wyverns and griffins and spirits and ghosts, and they're everywhere. Now, I understand from the context of the point of view of the game mechanics, this makes sense because the players want lots of contact with the world. They want lots of action. So they want to have numerous encounters, and because they need to grind that experience. They want the treasure. They want the trade goods and the unusual stuff. They want the quest hints and things like that. I understand why within the nature of the game mechanics why you have so many encounters. But after a certain point, for me, it breaks the verisimilitude of the world. It makes me say, okay, this can't function as a setting. It stops becoming an immersive experience and it just becomes a really pretty two-dimensional platformer. Really, it's just like watching Gauntlet from back in the day, or any of the other games like that. It becomes completely broken and I am no longer seeing it as a real world. Even though Witcher 3 has a lot of moral decisions, some of which I don't always agree with the way they were set up by the writers of the game, the creators of the game. I think they've often set up your character to fail. It isn't just that one is a better solution than the other, it's just that there is no good solution. And yes, I'm aware that that does happen in real life, but it seems to happen far more to Geralt than it does to your average person, even your average person who's in a situation where there's lots of action in their life. But Geralt spends more time in combat than any special forces unit has ever had, and he's by himself. And it's the same thing with adventuring parties. We want our adventuring parties, both from the player character and from the GM's point of view, to have lots of encounters with the world. We want them to be able to have the action they love, including the non-violent types of action, the political machinations, the personal relationships, the wheeling and the dealing, the non-violent thieving and sneaking and things like that. We want this stuff, and I understand that. But at what point does it break? Now, for me, watching Witcher 3, it's broken. There's just too much of it. The world couldn't exist. The common people could not survive in this world. Not all the mercenaries and city guards and what have you are going to keep everyone safe, because you can't have everyone living in a city. And as we've seen, even inside the cities, it is not safe. Particularly when you have witch hunts by religious zealots. Literal witch hunts. I mean, they're hunting witches. And when you have to have an agrarian base, because this is that kind of a setting outside the cities, farming and producing livestock and the byproducts of livestock directly and indirectly. You need the wool and the eggs and the milk and the meat and the hides. You need all these things for your society to function, but there are so many things in the world that are dangerous that you couldn't do it. And I've seen that same thing in Fallout 4. There's too much of it. Your common people couldn't survive. Yes, I know you need the player character to be the hero and come along and build settlements and defend everything, but you have to mod the game so you don't have things respawning really, really fast. I think Gopher's actually modded his game so they respawn at like 1/8 the rate or something like that. And even that seems to be really fast to my mind. Because you should be moving civilization into those spaces you've cleared, and you can't do that as quickly. So they respawn at faster rate than you can expand, which means you're never going to be able to expand because you're going to be constantly bumping up against these forces which are far more dangerous than your average citizen is, even in the Fallout 4 universe. So I guess I want to know, where does it break for you? At what point do you say, okay, I can't buy this anymore? It's become too gamey and it's no longer an immersive setting. So I guess I freely admit I understand the game mechanic desires behind this, whether it's a tabletop role-playing or the two examples I gave here with Witcher 3 and Fallout 4. But there needs to be a believable setting for me. And if there's too many encounters, if it's too hot a zone, I guess, it breaks that immersion for me, and it means I can't believe in the world anymore. So, let's hear what you have to say. At what level do you find it still immersive, and how many encounters do you think is too many? I mean, it makes sense if you're out in the wild. Okay, I get that. In fantasy setting or science fiction setting, or I should say science fantasy setting, because there are very few science fiction settings for computer games. You get out there in the wilds, okay, I understand why your encounters are going to be harder and more often. I think, like, I got that. But this isn't that. This is around civilization, and you need them to get below a certain level or you can't have civilization. So let's talk about how many things you need in your world before it breaks.